Hello, everyone. I'm Becca, dietitian by trade, mom 24/7, wife from the start, and when there's a few extra hours in the day, you might find me hitting the trails or on horseback.
And I'm Kara, a therapist to women, a mom to a boy, an entrepreneur, mountain junkie, and a postpartum runner.
And this is Fit for a Queen, a podcast that's devoted to the female athlete wanting to balance the teeter-totter of all the things we desire out of life as women: performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self, even if we only get 1 minute out of the day.
We're so excited to be bringing you the queens in the athletic world who have done just that. Okay, ladies, take a seat at your thrones, grab your crowns, and welcome to Fit for a Queen.
Well, welcome back, queens. Today we have Rachael Steil on, who's going to share a little bit about her book, Running in Silence, but also share her work that she's doing to bring about her mission that coaches can be more proactive in maybe catching athletes with eating disorders or how they can open the door for communication. But first off, let's give a little bit of background about Rachael. She's the author of the self-help memoir, Running in Silence, My Drive for Perfection and the Eating Disorder That Fed It. She writes articles about running and eating disorders for her website, runninginsilence.com, and was awarded the top eating disorder blog, and now is a speaker and advocate traveling the world. She was 6th and 7th place NAIA All-American in cross country and track, and now coaches high school cross country. Steil's greatest achievement was not breaking a physical barrier, but a mental one. Welcome, Rachael.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. My pleasure. So first off, let's kind of hear what you've been up to recently. You've just kind of hit the world with your mission and you're making it happen.
Yeah, I've been mostly focused on speaking engagements these past few months. I'm Vermont in Rhode Island. So that was like my biggest book tour trip, which was really intimidating because I was like traveling alone and I hadn't done anything like that before. So I really had to like go outside the box and, do some big things recently because I've mostly had some local talks. So yeah, focusing on presentations, and I really want to get some time to work on my second book too.
Oh, can't wait. I know I work a lot with runners, and it's been powerful to have them read that because I think for the first time they're like, oh my gosh, somebody that totally gets it. These are the exact moments or words that I've had running through my head, and I think it's been a real comfort.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So can you share what drove you so strongly to feel that compulsion that you just had to tell your story?
Yeah, it's funny, it actually started with writing. I've always wanted to be an author and a writer, and that's also when I started running. And I was taking this nonfiction creative writing class at Aquinas College, and part of like the prompts were to write about something you're uncomfortable with or that embarrasses you. And I guess they weren't like trying to make us divulge all our secrets, but it really kind of prompted me, like, if I want to be a better writer, I have to write about real stuff that I could be dealing with, other people to relate, and it's more interesting to read, and you kind of become more human, I guess, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So it actually began with me wanting to be a better writer. And once I started talking about my own issues with food, I realized I wasn't alone. I started posting these writings on my website, runninginsilence.com. And people were reaching out to me and saying they dealt with very similar issues and they could relate. Yeah, the push was definitely the writing. And then from there, when I shared it, I began to realize a lot more people were dealing with this. And this was a kind of story that I had always wanted to hear. Like, I was looking for a website that talked about runners dealing with eating disorders or just athletes. And I was looking for a book like this. And when I couldn't really find much out there, I decided to be the one to write it. And it really fueled the fire to just be like talking about this stuff.
And I love how you've done a great job of tying in that perfectionism trait, which made you such a good runner. But in your book, you could, like you said, you're grasping at straws that even though you were running phenomenal, you still were trying to look for, what if I changed this? What if I did this differently? And it felt like nothing was good enough.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always kind of been a perfectionist, and today I try to use it I always say I try to use it for good rather than because even if you are a perfectionist, it doesn't mean you have to absolutely eliminate it. There's some good things you can do with it, but once it becomes really destructive, you have to take a closer look and see how you can use it well, I
Right.
guess.
To your favor. So, as you started doing
Yeah.
this traveling and spreading the word, I'm just curious, what kind of feedback have you received from coaches specifically? Do you feel like it's opening the door that coaches aren't so much blamed, but that they have a great way to catch it early on? What have you heard so far?
Yeah, the feedback has been all very positive when they come to hear me speak. The coaches that usually don't attend my talks just because they have multiple options, usually I'm speaking at conferences most of the time, and they might go to a different talk. Usually they think, oh, well, I haven't dealt with this on my team before, so I don't need to worry about it. And I've had conversations with people. Yes, and it's never, I never blame coaches because I think they just don't realize it's as prevalent as it is. So the coaches that do come to my talk start to realize that they likely, have it on the team if they don't know already, and that there's different kinds of eating disorders. It's not just someone who is very, very thin. It can be all different sizes within the sport. So I think both the prevalence and the form that eating disorders can be opening to coaches, they just didn't realize. And again, I'm never like in this blame mode on coaches. I'm a coach myself, and I dealt with an eating disorder myself. And even as I went into coaching, I had no idea how exactly to deal with this. I kind of knew how to approach it just because these are ways I would have liked to have been approached in my own situation. But I think there definitely needs to be a change in our athletic community to be able to talk about this more and give coaches that education and the training to know what to do, because so many of us are left in the dark, and that directly, affects our athletes too.
Right. So, what would be a
Right.
suggestion if a coach suspected that their athlete did have an eating disorder?
So I always say, like, we have to have a behavior approach rather than an appearance-based approach. Someone actually who pointed out that I seemed depressed and I was isolating myself, and that was actually super helpful. And I feel like if she would have dived in a little more, I probably would have been more open that I was dealing with eating issues. At the time, I didn't know it was an eating disorder. Definitely a behavior-based approach, and not calling out someone in front of everyone, obviously. Maybe setting aside some time to talk, and just overall staying updated with all the athletes so that you can know when something seems off with someone.
Great. I love that. Behavior versus appearance. So,
Mm-hmm.
kind of stepping into you personally through your journey with recovery, what things do you think have been critical for you to maintain this healthy relationship with food and movement?
I think I heard a quote somewhere that said it's not necessarily about giving up the eating disorder, it's about replacing it. So, one thing that keeps me in recovery is having found something to replace the eating disorder, because it's like an addiction. Like, people stick with it even though they don't want it, because there's a part of it that they thrive off of, I guess. Not
Hmm.
thrive, maybe, but that it's sort of like a high. And for me, it served my running, unfortunate, but then obviously destroyed my running career. So finding something to replace it was the biggest thing. And I guess there wasn't one thing that replaced it. And I think that's important too, because if you have one thing to replace it and then that crashes, it's like, what do? You go back to your eating disorder. So I decided to find what I call now a core happiness. So a happiness at my core, just with who I am as a person, rather than based on what or how I do in certain, I guess, activities. So having a bunch of different, I guess, activities that I do rather than one sole identity, which in the past had been my control over running and my control over food. So a lot of people say eating disorders are like an abusive relationship. There's always something that kind of keeps you to it. So you have to find a relationship that's better, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. I think I heard a quote similar to that. It's like you're not recovering from an eating disorder, you're recovering from the things that you needed your eating disorder for. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And my therapist was really important in helping me to figure those kind of things out. Because I always recommend like getting help through therapy and a dietitian. I was so reluctant to go to a dietitian at all. And I, in my book, Running in Silence too, I was like, I know everything about food. What is the dietitian going to help me with? But a specific eating disorder dietitian, and my dietitian was a runner and triathlete, which was super helpful. She really helped me to understand my cravings. So all along I was thinking, oh, I'm just emotionally eating. I like can't control myself. And she showed me ways that, reduced the intense cravings and made me think, oh, maybe my body's not so broken.
Right. If we listen, it has a lot of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So you also shared your role as a coach by sharing your story with runners, and it allowed them to open up and instill messages. What kind of things have you heard from the girls that you've been able to share this with?
Girls in general, or like the girls I coach?
Oh, probably both.
Okay. So the girls I coach, I definitely bring up the eating disorder topic. And I didn't my first year of coaching. I wasn't sure how to go about doing it. And I was like fresh out of college. So I've been trying to open up just a mental health conversation. Usually we have cross country camps, so we do it there. And just talking overall about like the misconceptions of eating disorders so that they can reach out and not trivialize their struggles. Even if it's disordered eating or something's just not right in their life. And then emphasizing that our sport can be a wonderful gift in our lives, but it's not necessarily everything, and it shouldn't dominate. Like we should have other things that we enjoy doing. Valuing ourselves as people, like rather than just athletes. So I try to emphasize the wonderful qualities that the girls on our team have outside of just their performances, how they interact as teammates and everything. And then I guess in terms of opening up and people like messaging me about sharing my story, I think when we see other people open up, we begin to be open as well. And I even noticed that for myself. The more I shared my story and the more good feedback I was receiving, the more I was like, oh, I can be like super open about this because it's helping people. It's helping myself. It's breaking my own denial. It's making me really strive for recovery. So it's like we're all helping each other.
Right.
It's really cool.
Yeah, there's something said about being vulnerable that just makes you want to model and practice what you preach. I know I definitely, as a dietitian, I have to say, what would happen if they saw me? I want to make sure that I'm setting that positive role model.
Yeah, that really pushed me for recovery because as I was writing on my blog, on my website, I was still like dealing with the eating disorder, and every time in recovery that I was like, oh, I just want to go back to the eating disorder. I was like, but there's all these people rooting for me. Like I can't, the story's supposed to end right, I have to. So yeah.
So would you say that's something to encourage others, is even if they're not necessarily in a state of recovery, to put themselves out there because that will help them want to stay accountable?
Yeah, I mean, the title of my book and website is Running in Silence. And obviously, running in silence wasn't serving me well. The best thing I ever did for myself was speak up. And a lot of people think, oh, well, she just has bravery or courage. I was absolutely terrified. Like the first time I ever talked about it was to my mom. And I talk about this in the book too. Mm-hmm. But I emailed her because I was so scared to even say it in person to my own mom. And she's like a great mom. It's like she would be one of those understanding people. And that's why I reached out to her. So yeah, I started out from like complete secrecy, holding back on everything and eventually telling her through an email, talking to her in person, eventually telling one of my teammates, eventually talking to my coach, and then my website and the whole team. Like it just keeps growing, and you begin to muster this courage and begin to see that it's not as bad as you think it might be. Like there's a lot of people who can be understanding. Right. And even if the first people you tell get well, that doesn't mean what you're saying is bad. Like you should just find someone else to tell. Not everyone's going to respond appropriately, but don't let that deter you.
Exactly. Love that. So towards the interviews, we always wrap up by learning how you practice the Phit philosophy. So how do you balance performance? How do you manage your health, keep up with intellect, and then taking that critical time for self?
It's a really good question. I finished up my 5th year at Aquinas College in 2015. I had actually broken my kneecap from bone density issues. It's a whole story in itself in the second book I'm writing right now. So that really pushed me out of running, but it also pushed me to explore different parts of myself by trying out different activities. Eventually, I came back to running a little bit, especially with the coaching I'm doing. I try to run I still have some pain in my knees that kind of holds me back, but I have no major desire yet to compete again, maybe in the future. And I am not a slave to exercise. I know the more I exercise, the hungrier I'll get. And if I don't exercise as much, I'm just not as hungry. So I really trust my body to be able to balance that. And then in terms of food, it's funny how the recovery process kind of, I would say I'm recovered, but there's some foods I hadn't eaten for years and I'm starting to eat them more now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hadn't eaten this for so long. So fun. It's so great when you get to that part of recovery. Mm-hmm. Obviously you have to go through the ups and downs, and it takes a while. And it's hard. It's not easy right away, but once you get to that stage where it's fun, that's cool. Yeah. So I'm very open with what I eat and how I eat, and I make sure to spend time with my friends and family. I know I'm still a bit of a perfectionist, like I said before, but I try to use that for good things at my job, and I try to balance rest time too and enjoyment. So balance is the biggest thing. Yeah.
So do you have an idea when your second book will be released?
My goal this year, my New Year's resolution was to at least finish editing and revising by the end of the year. And I know that seems like a long time. People are like, Stephen King writes his books once, one book a month, which is amazing. I mean, even the first book, there's things that I've learned from reading it now as a 26-year-old, because I wrote it back when I was 21, 22. They always improve. So I'm trying to use those improvements now in my second book. And yeah, so basically it's going to take a little while, but I'm hoping maybe by next year, 2019, we'll see.
Well, I'll be sure to buy it quickly off Amazon. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be sure to put your website, your book on the show notes so people can find it, and then they can follow your blog as well. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Queens.
Thank you to our sponsor today, Sentimano Counseling. Sentimano Counseling is the premier perinatal mental health practice in Kansas City, treating mood disorders during pregnancy and postpartum, perinatal loss, infertility, eating, and exercise disorders. Go to sentimano.com for further information about the practice and services. For additional information on today's topic and guests, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fit for a Queen.
And # Fit for a Queen.
Don't forget to rate us on iTunes. We can't wait for you to join us next time on Fit for a Queen.
Bye, Queens.